So I hope everyone's having an easy fast, a meaningful day. It's a very deep day, but it's also a confusing day. It's a confusing day. Tish B'Av is a confusing day, especially Tish B'Av afternoon. We know that even in halacha, the Avelus, the morning of Tish B'Av, which is incredibly intense, Tish B'Av night and Tish B'Av morning, it begins to soften Tish B'Av afternoon. We're already allowed to sit on chairs. We're a little bit more lenient in terms of talking to people. And so there's a certain, the heaviness of the night and morning is a little bit softened. And we understand that, and Chazal already explained for us, that what's happening Tisha B'Av afternoon is that we're moving from just heavy Avelis to a time where it's still mourning the destruction, it's still Tisha B'Av, it's still a time of thinking about exile, but it's a time of also beginning to think about comfort, about nechama. About nechama, that's why by Mincha, we add in a special tefillah of Nachem, that Hashem should comfort Volitzin v'Yushalayim, that Hashem should comfort those that mourn over Yerushalayim. And so Tisha B'Av afternoon is this strange mixture, this strange hybrid of, on the one hand, still focused heavily on Galus, on exile, but on the other hand, also thinking about opening ourselves up to receive comfort. And that's a very strange thing, because nechama, comfort, is something that we would imagine is opposed to Galus. How could I at the same, this comfort means that there's no Galus anymore. Comfort is Mashiach. Mashiach is the comforter. Mashiach is called Menachem in Megillah Seicha. He's the one that brings comfort, because he takes us out of our tsar. He takes us out of Galus. So Tisha B'Av afternoon is a paradox. On the one hand, you're talking about a time which we're still thinking about exile and mourning exile. On the other hand, we're also receiving comfort, which is the opposite of exile. So which one is it? Is it redemption? Is it exile? Is it somehow both? So it's a very difficult time. And so what we're going to do for the next little bit, for the next few minutes, is learn about this sugya of Galus and Geulah in the context of Tisha B'Av. And, it's always one of those things when it comes to learning on Tisha B'Av, it's always hard to know exactly where the line is, what you're allowed to say, what you're not allowed to say. Every day of the year, the more learning, the better. Tisha B'Av, one has to be more cautious. So the eitzah that tzaddikim have given, and we'll try to connect to it as well, is that you do the best you can to learn only what you're allowed to learn. But if chas v'shalom we cross over the line, then everything we're learning is b'teres tefillah. Everything we're learning is like a prayer that we should be zocheh to experience it, to feel it, to live it, and all these things that we're learning about and we're davening for, we should be able to experience in real time. So the way to go about beginning to unravel this sugya of what exactly Tisha B'Av afternoon is, what's the inyan of the combination of both comfort and avelos, is the first piece of the puzzle is the fact that this is happening mincha time. Mincha time, the afternoon, the prayer of mincha is this time. Now, the Gemara tells us in Brachas, an interesting line. The Gemara says, Al tihi tfilas mincha kal beinecha. A person should not take mincha lightly. Mincha is a chashuv tefillah. Why? Because Eliyahu Hanavi was answered on mincha time. In the famous episode of Har Carmel, when the Jewish people had this sort of Eliyahu Hanavi made it. He made this debate or this conflict between the Nevi'im of the Jewish people, Eliyahu himself, and the Nevi'im Baal, the Avdei Avodah Zarah, and to be Mekadesh Shem Shemaim. So the Avdei Avodah Zarah brought a sacrifice, and they were obviously not answered. And then Eliyahu brings a sacrifice, and he's hoping that Hashem will accept his sacrifice and will be a huge Kiddush Hashem. And so Eliyahu Navi davens to Hashem, Aneni Hashem Aneni, that Hashem, you should answer me, Hashem answer me. And immediately he's answered. And that happened mincha time. So says the Gemara, a person should not take mincha lightly, because that was the tefillah that Eliyahu Navi was answered. So it's not a coincidence. It can't be a coincidence that Dafka mincha is the time that Eliyahu Navi was answered, and that's why we have to take mincha seriously, because Eliyahu Navi was answered at that time. So clearly we see a connection between mincha and Eliyahu. Now Eliyahu is also one of those personalities that's related to Geulah and to the transition between Galus and Geulah. Eliyahu is the Mavaser Toiv. He's the one that heralds in Mashiach. He tells us the good news of Mashiach's imminent arrival. So already Eliyahu Navi is standing at the doorway between Galus and Geulah. That's what Eliyahu Navi is. And so Tisha B'Av afternoon, which is also the doorway between Galus and Geulah, on the one hand there's Avelos over exile, on the other hand there's comfort over redemption. So it's sort of somewhere in between. That's Eliyahu Navi's place. That's exactly where Eliyahu Navi lives. And therefore the Tisha B'Av afternoon, this paradox, this dynamic, comes with Mincha. So to unravel this mystery, we then therefore have to learn more about Eliyahu Navi. That's going to be the way to approach this. So where does Eliyahu Navi come from? We know that Eliyahu Navi lived, and he appears in Sefer Malachim during the times of the first Beis HaMikdash in the north of Eretz Yisrael. That's where he lived. But we know that according to Chazal, he was earlier than that. Eliyahu Navi originally had an older name, Pinchas. Right? Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen. That was Eliyahu Navi. Pinchas ze Eliyahu. So again, if we're going to understand Eliyahu, who's going to be the key to understanding Tisha B'Av afternoon Mincha time, so we have to understand more deeply who Eliyahu Navi was and who he was in his original form, in his original identity. That's Pinchas. So who is Pinchas? So Pinchas is also someone that throughout Chumash you don't hear of, except for at one particular story. And the story goes, we know this, the end of Parshas Balak. The Torah tells us a whole Maisa that Balak, the king of Moab, hires Bilaam to curse the Jewish people. Right? Baruch Hashem, v'nahapichu. It flips on its head, and instead of cursing us, he blesses us. Baruch Hashem. And then that ends. And then this strange thing takes place. The Yeshiv Yisrael b'Shittim, the Jewish people are residing in the land of Shittim, right at the cusp of Eretz Yisrael, right at the border of Eretz Yisrael. And the Jewish people, all of a sudden, like seemingly out of nowhere, are overtaken by this temptation, by this Yetzer Hara of intermarrying with the women of Moab. And it's terrible. Things are going mamash haywire. People are intermarrying. Averis are happening in public. Jewish people are there's a plague that befalls the Jewish people as a punishment, and people are dying left and right. Ad kedei kach, it reaches to such a degree that the head of the tribe of Shimon, Zimri ben Salu, is committing a sin with Cosby Bas Tzur, the daughter, one of the princesses of Moab, Mamish, in the front of Moshe and Aaron, in front of the Zakanim, in front of the Sanhedrin, and everyone is so paralyzed with shock about what's going on. It's just everything's falling apart. Vayar Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen. Pinchas sees what's going on, and V'yikach roimach biyadai. He alone stands up with a spear, and he kills Cosby and Zimri, and that puts an end to. It brings everyone back to their senses. It puts an end to the Yetzer Hara. It puts an end to the plague, and he saves the day. That's how Parshas Pinchas ends. That's how Parshas Balak ends. I'm sorry. Then the next week, it's a little bit of a cliffhanger. Then you have the next week to Parshas Pinchas, and Parshas Pinchas picks up with that story and says that Hashem says to Moshe, because Pinchas was zealous for my name, and he cared about Kavod Shemayim, and he did the right thing by killing Cosby and Zimri, because of that I'm going to reward him even in this world, and I'm going to give him my covenant of peace. I'm going to give him a brisi shalom. I'm going to give him a reward of peace, of shalom, of peace. What does that mean? So this, Chazal interpreted that it means that he becomes a kohen, and so on. But that's the words, that he's given a reward of shalom, of peace. Okay. Then the parsha goes on that Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu, Nekaim nikmas Midyanim, take vengeance against Midyan and against Moab for what they just did. Acher tiyasef elamecha, and that will be the last thing you do in terms of leading the Jewish people. This is going to be the last battle you wage, and after that, now we'll be able to enter into Eretz Yisrael. And in fact, this is the last Indian that Klal Yisrael have to sort of work through. The last skeleton in the closet that we have to work through was this Indian of the Jewish people falling into intermarriage with Moab. Pinchas putting an end to that, and the Jewish people sort of following his lead of waging a war against Moab in vengeance and in revenge over what they did to us. And now we'll be able to get to Eretz Yisrael. That's basically the Maisa in a nutshell. That's Pinchas. That's the first place that we find Pinchas in Chumash, the origins of Eliyahu Navi. So a number of points. First of all, this Yetzer Hara that the Jewish people had of intermarrying with Moab, so when you you zoom out a little bit, this is the last Nisayan the Jewish people had to deal with before entrance into Eretz Yisrael. So the Jewish people are sort of in a Galus, right? They're sort of in a Galus in the desert. And they're at the cusp of their Geulah, which is Eretz Yisrael. And this is the final inyan that they had to work through. The Yetzer Hara of intermarrying with the women of Moav, and struggling with that, overcoming it eventually through Pinchas, and now they could get to Eretz Yisrael. If that's what happened to that generation, then it must be that that's something that we have to go through as well in order to get to our Eretz Yisrael, in order to get to our Geulah, in order to cross over our threshold from Galus to Geulah, which is always the jurisdiction of Pinchas, of Eliyahu Navi. He's the one that holds our hand crossing over that threshold. In order to allow us to cross over that threshold properly and healthfully, we have to somehow overcome this Yetzer Hara of intermarrying the women of Moav. So the first question is, what does that mean for us? What does that mean for us, the nisayon of intermarrying the women of Moav? Why is that the last inyan that the Jewish people had to go through? How is that relevant for us? And why is this the moment when Pinchas emerges, when Eliyahu Navi comes on the scene of world history? This is the inyan. That's number one. Number two, we know the Rebbeinu Shalom always goes mida keneged mida, measure for measure. So a person, God forbid, does something wrong. So Hashem doesn't just punish, Hashem gives a punishment that fits exactly what the person did wrong. And the same thing in positive. Person does a mitzvah, the Rebbeinu Shalom is not just rewarding stam, he's rewarding in such a way that models after the mitzvah the person performed. So the question is like this. Hashem has a lot of rewards to give. And of all the rewards and all the good things in Hashem's files, the one thing he gives Pinchas is shalom, a covenant of peace. That doesn't make much sense. How is that mida keneged mida? What Pinchas did was not an act of peace. It was the right thing. It was the mitzvah. He killed Kozbi and Zimri, and it was exactly what was needed at that time. But it was not an act of peace. It was an act of violence, holy violence, but an act of violence. So why would the Rebbeinu Shalom pay him back with peace? Now the truth is, you can make the argument, okay, well listen, through killing Kozbi and Zimri, he stopped the plague. Fine, and therefore I understand if he was given a reward of life, that would be fitting. He stopped death, so he's rewarded with life. And in a certain sense, he is rewarded with life. Pinchas is Eliyahu, and Eliyahu lives forever. So kind of makes sense. But that's not what the pasuk says in this case. He's given the reward of peace. Why is that fitting for his mitzvah that he did of killing Kozbi and Zimri, which is not an act of peace, it's an act of violence? Okay, those are the questions. Let's switch gears for a second. The Rambam wrote Mishnah Torah, amongst other svarim, Mishnah Torah. So in Mishnah Torah, the Rambam gathers together all the halachas of Torah Sheba'al Peh. Everything a Jew needs to know in this world, with the Beis HaMikdash, without a Beis HaMikdash, is everything. And so the last section of Mishnah Torah, the Rambam talks about the laws of the Jewish king, the Jewish kingdom, what Malchus Yisrael looks like halachically. So he goes through all the details to appoint a king, the powers of the king, the limitations of a king, all the halachas. Now, the very, very end of Hilchas Malachim, literally the end of Mishnah Torah, the Rambam talks about the halachas of Mashiach. Mashiach is also a Jewish king. He is the one that's going to revive and bring back Malchus Yisrael. So the Rambam talks about the halachas of Mashiach. What does Mashiach have to do in order to prove himself to be Mashiach? What does he have to do? What does he have to do in order to sort of escort us into that new era that's called the era of Geulah? What does he have to do? So the Rambam says the following lashon. Again, I'm not quoting it exact, but something along these lines. It's the end of Hilchas Malachim. The Rambam says that a person should not think. Don't think, says the Rambam, al yala daitchem. Don't think that Mashiach, in order to prove himself, in order to usher in the new era of Geulah, is going to have to do something new. He's going to have to make chidushim. He's going to have to make some miraculous phenomena, bring the dead back to life, make things levitate, make nifloyes, moisim, and isis, wonders and miracles. Says the Rambam, don't think that way. K'moisha hatibshem oimrim. Says the Rambam, don't think that way. That's what fools think. If you're foolish, that's what you think Mashiach is going to have to do. That's not the truth, says the Rambam. Rather, says the Rambam, Mashiach is not going to have to do anything miraculous. And says the Rambam, and I'll prove it to you. Says the Rambam, because there was a person that was named Rabbi Akiva. And says the Rambam, Rabbi Akiva was a chacham gadol michachmi HaMishnah. Rabbi Akiva was not a fool. Rabbi Akiva was a big chacham, very wise, from the time of the Mishnayos. And Rabbi Akiva believed that Bar Kochba was a good candidate to be Mashiach. Who is Bar Kochba? So the second Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, and a number of years later, there was a Jew by the name of Bar Kochba that led a revolt against the Romans. He led the Jewish people in a revolt against the Romans to give us sovereignty back over the land and to rebuild the Beis Hamikdash. And Rabbi Akiva, says the Rambam, was Bar Kochba's second in command. He was his arms bearer. Not only was he his arms bearer and clearly an advocate to the revolt and believed in the cause, Rabbi Akiva believed that Bar Kochba would be Mashiach. Not only Rabbi Akiva, says the Rambam, Rabbi Akiva, hu v'chol chachmei dori, all the wise men of the generation, all the Chacham of Klal Yisrael at the time believed and had hoped Bar Kochba would be Mashiach. And says the Rambam, and Bar Kochba wasn't doing anything miraculous. He was doing amazing things, but nothing miraculous. And yet Rabbi Akiva and all the Chachamim, who were wise people, believed that he would be Mashiach. So clearly, says the Rambam, Mashiach doesn't have to do anything miraculous to prove himself. What does he have to do? Okay, so the Rambam goes on to say what he has to do. He has to fight our wars. He has to battle our physical wars, our spiritual wars. Bring the Jewish people back to Torah mitzvahs. Be a tzaddik like David HaMelech. Bring us to Eretz Yisrael. Build the Beis Hamikdash. Amazing accomplishments, but nothing miraculous. Nothing miraculous. That's the Rambam. Okay, a couple problems. Anyone that learns the Rambam knows that the Rambam style, there's two qualities that define the Rambam style. Number one, halach l'maisa. The Rambam is not interested in giving you background. The Rambam, that's not the purpose of his sefer. He's not interested in even bringing proofs to his rulings. The Rambam just tells you black and white, this is the halacha, this is the halacha. How do I know it? He leaves that for later commentaries to figure out. That's not the stuff. The Rambam doesn't give any sources. In fact, there's even a letter that the Rambam wrote later on in life that he a little bit regretted not bringing down sources because he saw how much tumult it made by people disagreeing with him because they didn't appreciate where he was coming from. But the Rambam didn't write sources. He just tells you the halacha straight. Number two, the Rambam is very meticulous and measured with his words. There's not an extra word and certainly not an extra sentence in the Rambam. So the problem is this passage of the Rambam that I just mentioned to you goes against both those things. First of all, the Rambam, in this case, explains to you how he knows his ruling. The Rambam, all the Rambam should say, and it would fit every other Rambam in Mishnah Torah, which is the Rambam should say, Mashiach does not have to do anything miraculous. All he has to do is X, Y, Z, which are amazing accomplishments, but not miraculous at all. That's it. And then later Mefarshim would then try to break their heads over figuring out how the Rambam knew this from. And eventually someone will come up with the proof of Rabbi Akiva with Bar Kochba. But the Rambam doesn't give proofs for anything. Why over here does the Rambam go out of his way to prove to you that this is how I know it? Because Rabbi Akiva was backing Bar Kochba, and Bar Kochba wasn't doing anything miraculous. Why over here does he go out of his the usual program of giving you the proof? Number one. Number two, the Rambam, there's a lot of extra words in the Rambam. The Rambam makes it personal. All the Rambam should have said, if he's being concise, is that don't think Mashiach has to do anything miraculous. Rather, all he has to do is X, Y, Z. The Rambam says, don't think the Mashiach has to do anything miraculous like foolish people think. Because Rabbi Akiva was a very wise person and he didn't think that way. Why is Rambam getting personal? Like, okay, I'm sorry, I didn't know I was a fool. Evidently I'm a fool. What is this in you that the Rambam is bringing up? Foolishness versus wisdom. And Dafka Rabbi Akiva has to be the one brought up over here. What's the Rambam trying to tell us with this halacha, this concept of Mashiach not needing to do anything miraculous, and to realize that you have to be a chacham, but not just any chacham, you have to be a Rabbi Akiva deke chacham, as opposed to not believing in this, which puts in the category of being a fool. Why is that? What's going on over here? Again, this is not the usual method and methodology and style that Rambam usually goes with. All right, those are the questions. All right, so let's go back. So in that story of Pinchas, when the Jewish people are all of a sudden falling for this Yetzer Hara of intermarrying with the women of Mayav. So I mentioned that in Parshas Balak, it sort of comes out of left field. Like, where this all of a sudden, so what's the backdrop? Where is this coming from? So I mentioned that right before that story, Bilaam, instead of cursing us, he blesses us. Chazal understood that there's a connection between those two stories. Let me explain. Bilaam gives us a lot of blessings, Baruch Hashem. But let's try to identify what's the ikar, what's the main blessing of Bilaam. Amongst all the blessings, what's the main thing? So there's a Torah from Rav Tzadok HaKohen of Lublin. Rav Tzadok writes that if you want, in halacha, in Torah, in Yiddishkeit, when you want to identify the ikr of something, we have a klal which is achrein chaviv, that the end is always the ikr. Hakol hoylech achar chasayim. Everything goes based on how things end. The end is always the ikr. So says Rav Tzaddik, so if we want to define for ourselves what's the ikr blessing of Bilaam, it's the last blessing. Okay. What's the last blessing of Bilaam? The last blessing of Bilaam is the blessing of Geulah. That Bilaam, in all places in Chumash, this is the one place that Mashiach is talked about in the most open way, and that's the last blessing of Bilaam. Bilaam says, Arenu v'layata, I see it, but it's not now. Asherenu v'laykarv, I gaze upon it, but it's not in front of me. Darach kaichav mi'akav, a star will rise from the Jewish people, v'kam shevet mi'Yisrael, a leader will arise from the Jewish people, and he'll conquer the whole world for God, and he'll usher in a new era of Geulah. It's a vision of redemption. Okay. So it says Rav Tzaddik like this. Whenever a Navi gives us a message, it's not the pshat that, like, how does that work? It's not the pshat that, like, okay, the Navi, like, was asleep, and he had a good, amazing dream, and he wakes up and he says, guys, you're not going to believe it. Brother Shem gave him this unbelievable message. I have to tell it to you. That's not how it works. And everyone's like, wow, that was a great, it's gavaldik chizek. I didn't know that before. That's not it. Says Rav Tzaddik, when a Navi has a prophecy, or when a Neviah has a prophecy, that future event that they are being spoken, that they're being told, they're being shown, is entering into the world a little bit, a taste of it, an appetizer, a ha'ara, a shirayim of that event is entering into the world through the Navi. The Navi is not just gazing upon a distant future and then telling you what he sees. He's bringing you into that place. That event is being brought into reality at least a little bit. So says Rav Tzaddik, when Bilaam is prophesying about Mashiach, it's not just time he's telling the Jewish people, you have a good future ahead of you. He's giving the Jewish people a taste of Geulah. Now let's appreciate this. Let me give you a mashal. Let's say you had a person who Loleinu is let's say a hiker or something. He went on a hiking trip by himself, and he goes he's on a trail or something, and he's a little bit overconfident, and he decides he's going to go off the trail. There's a deer he wants to go photograph, whatever it is. And, as he doesn't know what he's doing, and eventually he gets lost, and he's lost there for 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. His family's, everyone's looking for him, the whole world, and he's like, thirsty and hungry and frightened, and just his whole world is caving in. So it's miserable, it's terrible, it's mamish frightening. And then in the middle of the dark night, all of a sudden he sees like a light, in the distance, and someone hears like, an echo, something sounding like his name being called. It's mamish. That would be anyone that, God forbid, went through such a thing. When you read or if you hear their, recollections of it, they'll describe that moment as being the greatest moment of their entire life. With marriage and children, there's that moment when they heard their name being called from a distance. So let's say finally the rescuers come, and the rescuer, instead of saying, okay, Yankel, we're taking you out of here, you're going to survive, you're going to be fine, what the rescuer says, here, he takes out of his pocket a thimble, right, or a shot glass with some fresh water, and he says, here, have a little taste of fresh water, I'll be back in 1,500 years. Not only does all of a sudden the forest go back to being dark, it's much darker than before. It's much more frightening than before. The sounds that he was listening to, that he was always worried, is that a coyote, is that a fox, is that a bear, who knows what that is, now are deafening. It's one thing for the Jewish people to be in exile. Okay, listen, Galus is terrible. Galus is dark. Galus is a forest. Galus is a dark, damp, dingy, frightening forest. But when you're given a taste of Geulah, and then it's taken away from you and says, oh, by the way, I'll come back in 2,000 years, then Galus becomes intolerable. Galus becomes absolutely intolerable. And that's exactly what the Jewish people experienced with the prophecy of Bilaam. Bilaam says to the Jewish people, here's a taste of Geulah. And the Jewish people tasted Geulah. And Galus was anyway terrible. But now that we tasted Geulah and now you're taking it away from us, the Jewish people were now absolutely obsessed with getting out of Galus by any means necessary. Now, The Jewish people at that time, that generation, were very, very big, profound neshamas, very big people. And they intuitively knew, and they sensed, when they tasted Geulah, through the prophecy of Bilaam, that the soul of Mashiach, although the soul of Mashiach is in the Jewish people from the house of David, but we also know that the soul of Mashiach finds its way connected to another nation, and that's who? The nation of Moav. Rus, the great-grandmother of David, was a convert from Moav, which means the Jewish people felt and sensed that somehow the soul of Mashiach Tzidkenu has to find its way, has to be filtered through Moav. Now, the normal, healthy approach would be give it time. It might take many generations for that neshama of Rus to find its way to the Jewish people. But the Jewish people at that moment were absolutely desperate and completely in a mode of absolutely rejecting everything Galus, ad kedei kach, that they said, let's just intermarry with Moav and speed the process up by any means necessary. And this is what compelled them to have that sin of intermarrying with Moav. It wasn't because they were rejecting their heritage. It's because they were in such desperation for Geulah, out of a complete hatred and distaste and disdain and disgust from Galus, that they felt they had no choice but to expedite the process. Let's get Mashiach out of it. Let's get Rus. Let's intermarry with Moav. And that's ultimately when you boil it down to its root, to its essence, to its core. What was that final nisayon? It's an amazing thing. That final nisayon was the Jewish people being absolutely turning their back on Galus in the most extreme way, being completely repelled and repulsed by Galus. That's what led to that terrible sin. So what's so bad? Isn't that the key of Mashiach? Isn't that the key to Geulah, to not want Galus? Let me explain. There's two different ways to look at Galus versus Geulah, and this is the point over here. There's two different ways to look at Galus and Geulah. You could look at that two eras, Galus versus Geulah, like a fool, or you could look at it like a chacham. How does a foolish person look at Galus versus Geulah? This is how a foolish person looks at it. The fool says that what is Galus? Galus is no Beis HaMikdash. Galus means no Eretz Yisrael. Galus means the Rebbeinu Shalom doesn't talk to us. Galus means the Rebbeinu Shalom doesn't protect us. Galus means the Rebbeinu Shalom doesn't love us. Galus means the Rebbeinu Shalom is not hugging us. That's all Galus. And what is Geulah? Geulah is leaving that and entering into a new place. And that new place is with Eretz Yisrael, with the Beis HaMikdash, with prophecy, with communication, with love, with support, with peace, with Menuchas HaNefesh and Yishuv Hadas. That's Geulah. That's a fool. That's a fool. If a person looks at Galus versus Geulah in such a way that Galus is empty of God's light and God's presence, it's a barren wilderness that's completely run by coyotes and foxes and venomous snakes and scorpions, and it's inhospitable. It's an inhospitable terrain for anything that's divine and everything that's transcendent. If that's what Galus is, then two things happen from that. A number of things happen from that. First of all, what happens from that is that there is absolutely no level of patience, and there's absolutely no level of an understanding of what Galus is. The Jewish person who sees Galus in such a way as a overbearing darkness without any light at all, that's something that you want to get away from. But the thing is like this: you want to get away from it. Number one, you're desperate to get away from it, and you're willing to do anything, even the wrong things, to get away from it. Aleph, Beis. You're not really trying to get to Geulah. What you're really trying to do is to get away from Galus. Because what does Geulah mean to you? Geulah is something that you've never experienced. In other words, if Galus is a place that's without God, that's without light, without peace, without comfort, without support, without communication with the divine, without any of that, that means that you've been born and raised in the darkness of the wilderness. You've never experienced light. So you can talk about wanting light all you want. You could talk about how I want Geulah and I want Geulah. You don't know what Geulah is. All you know is Galus. So really what you're saying is you don't want Geulah. What you're saying is you don't want Galus. And not Galus is not Geulah. Not Galus is not Geulah. What you're doing is running away. You're not running towards. In order to want Geulah, then you have to have at some point experienced it. And if Galus is the exact opposite of Geulah, and there's nothing in Galus that has anything to do with Geulah, then guess what? Then you've never experienced Galus. So what is it that you're running towards? Nothing. You're just running away. There's a mice that they say about a big tzaddik who was once, in a shtetl somewhere, and he was giving a shir, shmuz about Mashiach. And after the whole shmuz, so a very innocent and simple farmer came over to him, and he said, Rabbi, listen, I understand. The whole time you're talking about Mashiach's going to come, we're going to go to Eretz Yisrael, it's going to be Gavaldik, we're not going to have any Kazakhs, it'll be amazing. So he says, Rabbi, let me ask you a kasha. We're the good guys, we're the innocent ones, and the Kazakhs are the bad guys. So why is it when Mashiach comes, I have to pack my bags and I have to move away from the Kazakhs? Do me a favor, let me stay here, and let the Kazakhs move to Eretz Yisrael. What do I mean? I have to move away from them. Isn't the whole inyan of getting away from the Kazakhs? So we hear that mice, and we're like, oh, that's it's a simple farmer. We wouldn't make such a mistake. We make the same mistake all the time. All the time. The mistake that we make is that the inyan of Geulah is running away from Galus. And that's an understandable mistake if all of you've experienced was Galus. If all a Jew ever experienced was a godlessness, not godless, but the lack of God, a godlessness universe, then you've never experienced God to want God. What you want is not this. So let the Kazakhs go away. I need to get to Eretz Yisrael, let the Kazakhs go away. More than that, if this doesn't allow a true mourning over the Churban Beis Hamikdash. It doesn't. I'm going to say something, and I hope no one's offended by this, but it's a day and it's a time b'chalal that demands absolute honesty and truth. Let's be honest. Let me tell you something that I think many of us maybe can relate to. A person comes into Tisha B'Av, and a person's a religious Jew. God forbid, they want to have a good Tisha B'Av. And so, what does Tisha B'Av mean to them? What does it mean? What does it mean, Tisha B'Av? Tisha B'Av to them means that we have to feel the darkness of Galus. That's what it means. Because I don't know what Geulah is, but what I can do is feel the darkness of Galus. That I can do, or that I should do. But here's the problem. In earlier generations, Galus was really terrible. Galus was really, really terrible. In some machzorim, it says like on different parts in different places, Kan tzarich livches. Over here, you should cry. So it was like, this parak, okay, turn on the faucet and cry. The answer is, in earlier generations, they could always cry. They're holding back their tears. They're always in a state of crying. They're just holding themselves back. So in this paragraph, don't hold back anymore. Galus was mamish miserable. But Baruch Hashem, let's say you have a Jew, living in our times, this is still tzaras, don't get me wrong, but you understand, it's nothing compared to our ancestors. When we fetch about our Inyanim, there's a part of us that feels guilty because of the stuff that we know we had to go through in earlier generations. So a person comes into Tisha B'Av and they want to mourn, and to them what that means is to feel the darkness of that wilderness, the darkness of that place, and to hear all the sounds of the coyotes, and in fact to feel the emptiness of Galus. So how does a person go about doing that? So the first approach is they're very religious, and they say, you know what, it's going to be through Eicha, and I'm going to listen to Eicha, and I'm going to allow the tsar of Eicha to evoke within me mourning over Galus. Doesn't work. Okay, fine. So the next day the person says, okay, Eicha was too unrelatable. It's too unrelatable. So let's do Kinnis. Okay, so Kinnis, that'll be more relatable. And I'll read the English one, it'll talk about the Crusades and the Inquisitions and all the tzaras and so on, and it's all poetic and it's beautiful. And that's going to be the way how I'm going to feel the darkness of Galus. And if I feel the darkness of Galus, I'll want redemption. And it doesn't work. And then the person begins to not only not have a good Tisha B'Av, but they begin to feel guilty over themselves. So what type of cold-hearted Jew am I that I went through Kinnis and I feel nothing? So they say, you know what, okay, fine, it's still unrelatable. Let me watch a Holocaust video or something that they make, survivors talking or something about the Holocaust. If I don't feel from that I'm mamish a cold-hearted, I'm chas v'shalom. So you watch that and still nothing. And not only do you not have Tisha B'Av now, I now found out that I'm mamish, I have a heart of stone. So the person is miyayish, and then they begin to take a whole new approach to Tisha B'Av. Okay, Tisha B'Av is no longer to me going to be about feeling the depth of Galus and wanting Geulah from that. It's now going to be try to be inspired. It's going to be inspired. So I'm going to watch videos about nature. I'm going to watch videos about Hashgacha Pratis, and somehow that's Tisha B'Av. Because I can't really feel the pain of Galus, because Galus is not so bad. And I tried the Holocaust, I tried the Inquisitions, I tried Eicha, I tried the Kinnis, it's not working. So I'm just going a different approach. It's now a day of inspiration. And you know what happens? A few minutes later, you're just binging on some sitcom, right before Mincha. What happened to Tisha B'Av? The answer is it all boils down to this Nakuda, is that the person viewed Galus and Geulah as a fool. Is that Galus means there is no God, there is no light, I've never experienced light in my life. And so everything that's Geulah is just running away from this. And guess what? If this is not so miserable, then why am I running away from it? And I can't evoke within myself a desire to run away from something that's not so terrible. This is all looking at Geulah and Galus and Geulah as a fool. And says the Rambam, if this is the truth, if that was it, that Galus is a place without God, without a Lakus, without Hashem talking to you, without His communication, without His support, without His love, and Geulah is all of that, then guess what? Then technically, for Mashiach to usher us into that new era, He should do new things. If Geulah is taka new, and it's something different than Galus, then how should Mashiach usher us into that new era? By doing something new. But says the Rambam, but if you feel that way, it means that you're looking at Galus and Geulah with the eyes of a fool. So what is the truth? The truth is, Chacham Eina B'Roshai. The truth is that one has to look at Galus and Geulah with the eyes of a wise person. Eizehu Chacham. What does it mean, a wise person? Haraya es hanoiled. One who sees something and realizes that it didn't come out of nowhere. It came from something else. He sees Raya es hanoiled. He sees something born from something else. Let me give you an example. Every one of us looks at an apple, and we know this apple came from what? From an apple tree. We know that. But if you were a Martian and you came to planet Earth and I told you, you see this apple? You see how delicious it is and how nutritious it is? And look at that tree. You see how unappetizing it is and how static it is and how not sweet it is? This apple came from there. The Martian would say, are you a Meshigana? What type of it's impossible. And we would say to the Martian, you're typish, you're a fool. Why? Because even though the apple looks like something new, but every single one of us knows that the apple comes from the tree, and the apple at some point emerges out of the tree. But the apple didn't come out of nowhere. The apple was cooking in the tree. It was hidden in the tree, and it took time for that essence of apple to concentrate and to materialize, to eventually emerge off of the branch. But the apple comes from the tree. Ezo chacham rois anoiled. The chacham looks at Geulah as something that was always existing in Galus. The Chacham realizes that Geulah is not now the Rebbeinu Shalom talks to me. Geulah is not now the Rebbeinu Shalom loves me. Now the Rebbeinu Shalom embraces me. Now the Rebbeinu Shalom wants me. Now the Rebbeinu Shalom is the feet under my ground, the ground under my feet. Now we have avodas Hashem. Sheker v'chazav, that's heresy. That's tibshis, that's foolishness. The secret of the Chacham and his orientation to Geulah is that all that is right now, we just don't see it. And this is what a person is mourning over. What we're mourning over is not the fact that we're in darkness and we want to go to light. What we're mourning over is the tragedy of being in light and not seeing it. That's what we're mourning over. Lamashal. If let's say a person has a child, Baruch Hashem has a child, and the child was in a very difficult situation, and the person did unbelievable shtadlus behind the scenes to save the child and to help the child out from their difficulty. What type of pain would the parent have if the child was unable to ever know that it was the parent that helped them? More than that, what type of pain would the parent feel if the child was told the opposite, that it was the parent that put you in the difficulty and someone else came and took you out of that problem, but it was not your parent? What the parent so desperately wants is the child's eyes to look at their eyes, and with that recognition of like, I know that you love me, I know that you helped me out. And when the parent is not able to have the eye contact like that, and the child is not able to know how the parent is, that the entire universe of the parent is the child, it's not only the parent doesn't have nachas. I'm not talking about that egocentric, I want nachas. I'm talking about it's a deep rachmanis on the child, for the child to think that the parent was not protecting them. And it's a pain on the parent for not to have the child, for the parent to not sense the love in reciprocation back from the parent, from the child. The lack of eye contact, that's the biggest pain in the world. That's what we're mourning over. You know what type of Rachmanis it is? The Rabbanu Shalom every single second of every single day thinks nothing else but what could I do to bring the Jewish people closer to me? What could I do to support them, to help them, to make me love me? I should love them. And that's not the impression we have in this world. That is the tsar of Galus. That's what Galus is. Not that we're in a wilderness that's completely dark without any light. We're in light. We're completely surrounded by light, but we don't see it, and we're not allowed to see it. That gives unbelievable pain to us, but much deeper than that, it gives pain to the Rabbanu Shalom, the source of that light, and the one that is taking care of us, but we're not allowed to see it. That's what mourning over Beis Hamikdash is. When a person mourns in such a way, you're not running away from Galus, that's running towards Geulah, you understand? That's called trying to experience reality for what it actually is. And this is the Chacham that sees Geulah as something that's born from Galus. That Galus needs to be removed to allow Geulah to be shown for what it always was. It's not that Pshat the Rabbanu Shalom is going to begin to talk to us when Mashiach comes. That's heresy. The Rabbanu Shalom has always been talking to us. Every single experience that you have is Rabbanu Shalom talking to you. Every single thought, feeling, and action that you go through is some level of connection to Rabbanu Shalom. Sometimes it's good and sometimes it's a difficult one, but it's a connection. There's no such thing. And not realizing that and not being allowed to realize that and not being able to look in God's eyes, so to speak, with that recognition of, I know that you were with me. I appreciate everything that you've done for me. And thank you for everything that, for being my universe, for the Rebbeinu Shalom being Mekam Shel Olam, not giving Hashem that recognition and having Him go through that pain, Kiviyachol, of supporting us and being our universe without us realizing it. That's the tsar of the Shechina. That's the tsar of Galus. That's what we're longing to get out of. That's the Chacham that sees Geulah in such a way. Says the Rambam, if you think that Mashiach is going to have to make any new phenomena to bring us into a new place, you're a fool. But if you're a Chacham, like Rabbi Akiva, then you know that Geulah is nothing new. Geulah is nothing new. Geulah is seeing reality from what it always was. And there was one Jew of all time that had eyes like this, and that was Rabbi Akiva. The whole inyan of Rabbi Akiva's life was people looking at him and him looking at everyone else in this way, of not optimism, but of seeing a future light that's just hidden right now. That's Rabbi Akiva. Think about this very quickly, because, everyone knows these stories, right? Rachel is the daughter of one of the richest Jews in Yerushalayim, Kalba Savua, right? And we all know she's being read the best ideas. All the Shadchanim in Yerushalayim, they're clamoring for the Shadchanis, and they just want to send her the best guys in Beis Medrash, and that's what she's looking for. She's looking for a Talmid Chacham, and she says, you know what? She rejects all those ideas. Akiva ben Yosef, that's the one she wants. Some farmer that's working for her father. Why? Why Akiva ben Yosef is an Amart? He's ignoramus. He doesn't learn. Tzenu Mali. He's modest and he has good midas. That's the Gemara says in Ksubas. So the Maharsha says, why is she looking for those two things? Why are those two things so important? Says the Maharsha, because those things are important to become a Talmid Chacham. I understand. You're being read Talmid Chachamim. What papers, what profiles are being presented before? All Talmid Chachamim. And so she rejects all of that because she sees in Rabbi Akiva, she sees in Akiva and Yosef Rabbi Akiva, and she sees it from his midas. And a Martian would say, what in the world, how do you see Rabbi Akiva from such a person? And she says, you're a tipish, but I'm a chokhmah. I understand, I have wisdom, and I see the future in this person, and I see what's beneath the surface. And that's what I see, that's who I know. More than that, let's appreciate this. Chazal say, that Rabbi Akiva said later on in his life, that in those early years, when he was not Rabbi Akiva, when he was just Akiva ben Yosef, whenever he saw Talmid Chacham, he wanted to bite him like a donkey. And Chazal say, the Talmidim asked Rabbi Akiva, like a donkey, that's not normal. You want to bite someone like a dog. Then a dog breaks the skin. A donkey breaks the bones. I wanted to break the bones of Talmid Chacham. Rabbi Akiva was not just a nice, sweet Amaretz. Rabbi Akiva was anti-Torah, was anti-religious. He was something that was picketing against the yeshivas. He hated Talmid Chachamim. And Rachel Bas Kabbalah marries him because she sees his midas and she knows there's Rabbi Akiva inside of him. That's where Rabbi Akiva comes from. Someone that does not define things based on their superficial side. There's no tipshus in there. It's all chachma. It's just seeing the future. It's seeing the noilad. And that same Rabbi Akiva with all the chachamim sees foxes going in and out of Kodesh HaKodshim, and his chaverim are crying, and he's laughing. And they say, Akiva, why are you laughing? Why are you crying? Why are you crying? Crying because it's the same place. The same place that it says about which the Kohen Gadol's not allowed to go only once a year. Now Shualim Hulchu Bat says in Eicha. Now foxes are going. We shouldn't cry. And Rabbi Akiva says that's exactly why I'm laughing. Because if the prophecy of destruction has been fulfilled, then it just means it's a matter of time until the prophecy of redemption will be fulfilled. That's not optimism. That's not looking at the cup half full. There is nothing but fullness. There is nothing but light of Geulah. Rabbi Akiva was a giant neshama that his stature was so high, was so great that a distant future was actually now. It's mamish right now. It's just unfolding. Such a Jew can mourn over Beis Hamikdash. Such a Jew wants redemption. Such a Jew can paskin, like the Rambam says, that Mashiach does not make anything new because there's nothing new. The transition between Galus and Geulah is one with rachamim and chasadim and easy and smooth, because all it is that just revealing the truth, And this is why Rabbi Akiva, and we know the Chazal say that of all the books of Tanakh, there was one book that was a very big debate whether it should be canonized in Tanakh, whether it should be accepted in Tanakh, and that was the book of Shir Shirim, Song of Songs. Wasn't so simple. Why? It talks about not so nice things. And Rabbi Akiva put his foot down and he said, Kol Hashirim Kodesh. All songs are holy. As Yashir is Gevaldik, Shir Haber is Gevaldik, Shir Miriam. It's all amazing. Shir Shirim, it's Kodesh Kadoshim. It's a holy of holies. Only Rabbi Akiva, Rav Kook said this, only Rabbi Akiva, in whose greatness a distant future is absolutely present. Only Rabbi Akiva that does not see Galus and Geulah as two separate realities. Only Rabbi Akiva that everything is light. It's just either you see it or you don't see it yet. Rabbi Akiva therefore could look at Jewish history, to look at a Jew, to look at himself, to look at the whole world, and all he sees is Shir Hashirim. All he sees is Shir Hashirim. That's Rabbi Akiva. So what's going on with Rabbi Akiva is Rabbi Akiva is revealing to us this idea of seeing Geulah from what it is, the chachma of Royas and Noilad. Let's go back. So Pinchas comes and kills Cosby and Zimri. And Pinchas, let's appreciate this, by Pinchas coming and removing that Yetzer Hara, which as we said before is the Yetzer Hara of foolishness, the Yetzer Hara of looking at Galus and Geulah as two separate things, and because of that, just running away from Galus. And number two, running away from Galus with absolute, by any means necessary, with absolute desperation. Pinchas kills Cosby and Zimri, and he brings peace to the world. What peace does he bring? He brings peace between the Jewish people and Galus. That's what he does. He brings peace between us and Galus. That until now, before Pinchas, what's the last Nisayan? That Galus is terrible. Galus is just a dark, dingy, damp, dangerous woods that has no redeeming qualities at all. But the problem is, we think that might be a good way of thinking. That's incorrect. Because what that means is we're not running towards Eretz Yisrael, we're just running away from the Kazakhs. That's not Geulah. What Pinchas has to do is to remind the Jewish people of what Galus really is, which is light and redemption covered over. And now you want Geulah. Now you want to see what reality is. Now you're running towards Eretz Yisrael, not running away from the Kazakhs. And that's the difference. That's what the afternoon of Tisha B'Av is. The afternoon of Tisha B'Av, which is the Inyan of Elyon Novi, is the Inyan of Galus, but also comfort at the same time. What does that mean? How could you bridge the two? How could Galus and Geulah be one? That's exactly the truth. Says the Rambam, there's nothing new with Mashiach. It's a revelation of what always was. The Rebbeinu Shalom was always talking to us. The Rebbeinu Shalom always loved us. The Rebbeinu Shalom was always embracing us, always pushing us forward, always pulling us close to Him. And when Mashiach comes, we'll be able to finally know it and feel it and sense it and run and follow suit. That's what Geulah is. No, Hashem should bless us. We should be zachar with the last few minutes before Tisha B'Av is ending. We should be zachar to mourn the Churban Beis Hamikdash properly, instead of trying to find reasons to be upset and depressed, to actually run towards Eretz Yisrael instead of running away from Kazakhs. We should be zachar to feel what Galus is, to feel what Geulah really is, to have that comfort that comes from his kashrus with Elyon Novi and all the tzaddikim emes. We should be zachar to experience, both collectively and individually, a Geulah shalem v'amitz barachimim b'bias kol tzedek meher v'meinu. Amen.